The train screeched to a halt in the winter twilight, and Beatrice Foster pressed her gloved hand against the frosted window, watching her breath fog the glass as she peered out at what would become either her salvation or her grave. Snow fell in thick curtains across the platform of Fargo, North Dakota, and she could barely make out the rough wooden buildings through the white veil, their oil lamps glowing like distant stars in the gathering darkness of December 1885. She had traveled nearly 2,000 miles from Boston, carrying only a worn carpetbag, and a letter from a man named Owen Kendrick, a cattle rancher who had advertised for a wife in the matrimonial section of the Gazette. His letter had been different from the others she had received, not flowery or full of empty promises, just honest words about a hard life that needed someone brave enough to share it. After her father's death had left her penniless, and her aunt had made it clear she was no longer welcome in her childhood home, Beatrice had answered that letter with trembling hands and a desperate heart. Now, stepping down onto the platform, her boots sank into 3 inches of fresh powder, and the cold struck her face like a physical blow. She had never experienced cold like this in Boston. This was something alive and hungry, seeking every gap in her wool coat and thin dress beneath. The other passengers hurried past her toward the warmth of the station house, but Beatrice stood frozen, searching the platform for a man she would recognize only from his brief description. Tall, brown hair, usually wearing a sheepskin coat. "Miss Foster." The voice came from behind her, deep and careful, and when she turned, her carpetbag nearly slipped from her numb fingers. The man standing in the falling snow was indeed tall, perhaps 6 feet or more, with broad shoulders beneath that promised sheepskin coat. But what caught her breath was his face, weathered by sun and wind into a map of hard years, with eyes the color of summer sky that looked at her with something between hope and fear. "Yes," she managed, her teeth already beginning to chatter. "Mr. Kendrick." He nodded once, then reached for her bag. "Welcome home," he said, and the words hung in the frozen air between them like a promise neither was sure could be kept. Owen led her toward a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses, their breath streaming white in the cold. He helped her up onto the seat with surprising gentleness for such large hands, then climbed up beside her and tucked a heavy bearskin around her legs. The warmth was immediate and blessed, though her face still stung from the wind. "The ranch is about an hour's ride," he said, snapping the reins. "Storm's coming in harder tonight. Should have been here earlier, but a fence broke and I had to mend it first. Cattle would have scattered." Beatrice nodded, unsure what to say. In his letters, Owen had been more forthcoming, telling her about his life and asking about hers. But now, sitting beside this stranger who was meant to become her husband, words seemed impossible to find. She studied him from the corner of her eye as the wagon rolled through Fargo's Main Street. He looked to be perhaps 30, though the lines around his eyes might have added years that were not truly there. His jaw was strong and clean-shaven, and his hands on the reins were steady despite the cold. "I hope the journey was not too difficult," he said after several minutes of silence broken only by the creak of wheels and the soft thud of hoofbeats in snow. "It was long," Beatrice admitted, "but I have no complaints. Your letters prepared me for the distance." "Letters are one thing. Reality is another." He glanced at her then, and she saw worry in those blue eyes. "This is not Boston, Miss Foster. Winters here can kill a person. The work is never done, and I live 10 miles from the nearest neighbor. Are you trying to convince me to get back on that train?" Beatrice asked, and was surprised to hear a note of humor in her own voice despite her exhaustion. Owen's expression shifted, something that might have been a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "No, just want you to know what you are getting into before we reach the preacher." "The preacher?" Tomorrow, if you are willing. Reverend Matthew's lives in town. I thought we could go back in the morning, make it proper and legal. He paused. Unless you want more time to decide. Beatrice looked out at the endless white landscape rolling past them. The town had fallen behind, and now there was only snow and sky and the dark shapes of distant hills. More time would not change her circumstances. She had nowhere to go back to, no money for a return ticket even if she wanted one. But more than that, something in Owen's careful courtesy, in the way he had tucked that bearskin around her without being asked, made her think he might be the kind of man worth taking a chance on. Tomorrow is fine, she said quietly. They rode in silence for a while longer, the snow falling heavier now, until the world seemed reduced to just the small circle of light from the wagon's lantern. Beatrice's hands were numb despite her gloves, and her face felt like it might shatter if she tried to smile. She was beginning to wonder if they would ever reach the ranch when Owen pointed ahead. There, he said. Through the white curtain she could see lights. As they drew closer, the lights resolved into a house, larger than she had expected, built of sturdy logs with smoke rising from a stone chimney. There was a barn beyond it, and several other outbuildings she could not quite make out in the storm. It looked solid and real, not the desperate hovel she had half feared. Owen drove the wagon right up to the front door, then jumped down and came around to help her. His hands gripped her waist to lift her down, and for a moment she was aware of his strength, the certainty of his hold. Then her feet touched the ground and he released her, grabbing her carpet bag and hurrying toward the door. The warmth inside the house hit her like a wave. A fire roared in a large stone fireplace, and oil lamps cast golden light across a main room that was surprisingly neat. There was a table with 4 chairs, a rocking chair near the fire, shelves lined with books, and doorways leading to what must be other rooms. The floor was wood, worn smooth by years of use, with a braided rug in blues and greens spread before the hearth. "I will show you to your room," Owen said, setting her bag down. "You can have the bedroom. I will sleep out here tonight." Beatrice turned to look at him, this man who had called her home but was now offering to sleep by the fire instead of claiming his husbandly rights before they were even wed. "Thank you," she said, meaning it. He showed her to a small bedroom with a real bed covered in quilts, a dresser, and a washstand with a basin and pitcher. "Water in the pitcher might be cold," he said. "I can heat some if you want. This is fine." Beatrice set her gloves on the dresser, her fingers slowly beginning to regain feeling. "Mr. Kendrick, I want you to know I appreciate your kindness. I know this arrangement is strange for both of us." Owen stood in the doorway, filling it with his height and breadth. "Call me Owen," he said. "And I hope you will let me call you Beatrice. Seems foolish to be formal when we are planning to marry tomorrow." "Beatrice is fine," she agreed. "Or B, if you prefer." "Beatrice," he said, as if testing the name. "It suits you." Then he stepped back. "There is stew on the stove if you are hungry. Help yourself to anything you need. I will be up early to tend the animals, but I will try not to wake you." After he closed the door, Beatrice sat on the edge of the bed and let herself breathe. The mattress was stuffed with something soft, perhaps feathers, and the quilts were heavy and warm. Through the door, she could hear Owen moving around the main room, the clank of the stove door, the scrape of a chair. She should be terrified, she thought. She should be wondering what kind of madness had brought her 2,000 miles to marry a stranger. But instead, she felt something strange and unexpected. Hope. She slept deeply that night, exhausted from the journey, and woke to pale winter light filtering through a small window. The room was cold enough that she could see her breath, but the pile of quilts had kept her warm. She dressed quickly in her best dress, a dark green wool that had been her mother's, and braided her honey-colored hair into a neat coil at the nape of her neck. When she emerged from the bedroom, Owen was already inside, stoking the fire. He had snow on his shoulders and his cheeks were reddened from cold. "Morning," he said. "I have coffee on, and there is bread and butter if you want breakfast before we head to town." Beatrice discovered she was ravenous. The bread was dense and filling, clearly homemade, and the butter was sweet and fresh. Owen sat across from her at the table, drinking coffee and watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "Did you make this bread?" she asked. "I manage," he said, "but I would not claim to be any kind of cook. Mostly I eat to stay alive, not for pleasure." "It's good bread," Beatrice said. "Better than I expected." "That is a low bar," Owen replied, and this time she was certain she saw a smile. They rode back to Fargo through a world transformed by snow. The storm had passed in the night, leaving everything buried under nearly a foot of white. The sky was a pale blue, endless and cold, and the sun glittered off the snow until Beatrice had to squint against the brightness. Owen handled the horses with easy confidence, and Beatrice found herself studying him again in the daylight. He was handsome in a rough way, she decided, with the kind of face that looked like it had been carved from the land itself. Reverend Matthews lived in a small house beside the white clapboard church. He was an older man with kind eyes and a booming voice, and he did not seem at all surprised when Owen showed up with a bride. "Been telling you for years you needed a wife," he said, clapping Owen on the shoulder. "Glad you finally listened." The ceremony was brief and simple. Beatrice stood beside Owen in the Reverend's parlor, repeating words that would bind her life to this stranger's, and when Owen slipped a plain gold band onto her finger, she felt the weight of it like a promise. The ring was too large, clearly made for someone else, and Owen frowned when he saw how it slid on her finger. "It was my mother's," he said quietly. "I can get it sized." "It's fine," Beatrice said, closing her hand to keep it in place. "It's perfect." The Reverend pronounced them married, and Owen bent to kiss her cheek, a brief, gentle brush of lips that made her blush. Then they were signing papers, and the Reverend was wishing them well, and they were back in the wagon heading toward the ranch under the cold winter sun. "So," Owen said after a while, "you are a rancher's wife now." "I suppose I am," Beatrice agreed. She looked down at the ring on her finger, this tangible proof that her life had irrevocably changed. What does a rancher's wife do in the middle of winter? Owen considered this. "Well, there are chickens that need feeding. A garden to plan for spring, though that is months away. Mending, cooking, cleaning. The usual household tasks. But beyond that, you can do whatever you like. I have books if you enjoy reading. There is a piano, though it is badly out of tune. And when the weather is not too harsh, you could ride with me to check the cattle if you want." "You have a piano?" Beatrice asked, surprised. "It was here when I bought the place. Previous owner's wife played, I think. I never learned." He glanced at her. "Do you play?" "I used to. Before my father died and we had to sell ours." She had loved that piano, the way music could transform their cramped Boston apartment into something larger and more beautiful. The memory ached. "Then it is yours now," Owen said. "Maybe you can teach me if you are patient enough." They reached the ranch as the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon. Owen unhitched the horses and led them into the barn while Beatrice went inside the house. It was strange to think of it as her house now, her home. She walked slowly through the main room, really looking at it for the first time. The books on the shelves were an eclectic mix. Agricultural manuals, a few novels by Dickens and Hawthorne, a leather-bound volume of Shakespeare's plays. The rocking chair by the fire had a cushion embroidered with a simple pattern of flowers. And there, against the far wall, stood the piano Owen had mentioned, a lovely upright in dark wood. She lifted the cover and touched the keys experimentally. They were dusty and the tuning was indeed terrible, but the sound still made her heart lift. She played a few scales, wincing at the sour notes, then attempted the opening bars of a Bach prelude she had once known by heart. Her fingers were stiff from disuse and cold, but the muscle memory was still there, guiding her through the familiar patterns. She did not hear Owen come in until he spoke. "That is beautiful," he said, and she turned to find him standing in the doorway, watching her with an expression of wonder. "Even with the bad tuning, it needs work," Beatrice said, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "Both the piano and my playing sounded perfect to me." Owen crossed to the stove and began pulling out pots. "I should start supper. We have venison, potatoes, some carrots that are starting to get old." "Will that do? Let me," Beatrice said, standing up from the piano bench. "That is supposed to be my job now, is it not?" Owen looked like he wanted to argue, but he nodded and stepped aside. Beatrice took stock of the kitchen area. It was basic but functional, with a good cast iron stove, various pots and pans hanging on hooks, and a larder that held more supplies than she had expected. She found the venison, already butchered into neat steaks, and the vegetables Owen had mentioned. She had learned to cook by necessity after her father's death, and though she was no expert, she knew enough to make a decent meal. As she worked, Owen sat at the table and cleaned his rifle, occasionally glancing up to watch her. The domesticity of the scene struck Beatrice as surreal. 24 hours ago, she had been on a train, alone and uncertain. Now she was cooking supper in a ranch house in North Dakota, married to a man she barely knew. Life could turn on a single decision, she thought, for good or ill. She hoped desperately it would be the former. "Tell me about the ranch," she said as she seasoned the meat. "How long have you had it?" "5 years, Owen replied. "Bought it with money I saved working cattle drives. The previous owner wanted to go back east, said his wife could not take the isolation. I got it for a fair price." He paused. "I have about 200 head of cattle right now. It is not a huge operation, but it is enough to make a living. In the summer, I hire a couple of hands to help with the work, but in winter it is mostly just me." "Just you," Beatrice echoed. "That sounds lonely." "It has been," Owen admitted. "That is why I wrote to the matrimonial service. Not just because I need help, though that is part of it, but because this house felt too empty. A life felt too empty, I suppose." Beatrice turned from the stove to look at him. "I understand that feeling," she said quietly. "After my father died, I lived with my aunt, but I was not really living. I was just existing day after day, waiting for something to change. When I saw your advertisement, it felt like a door opening." Owen's blue eyes met hers, and for a moment the connection between them felt almost tangible. "I am glad you walked through it," he said. Supper was simple but good, and they ate together at the table, talking more easily now. Owen told her about the ranch's history, about his own childhood on a farm in Kansas, about the hard winter of 1880 that had killed half his herd and nearly broken him. Beatrice told him about Boston, about her father's work as a bookkeeper, about her mother who had died when she was 12. They were sharing their stories, she realized, learning the shape of each other's pasts. After supper, Owen insisted on helping with the dishes despite Beatrice's protests. They stood side by side at the wash basin, and when their hands brushed in the soapy water, Beatrice felt a spark of awareness that made her breath catch. Owen must have felt it too, because he glanced at her quickly, then away, a flush creeping up his neck. That night, Owen brought her carpet bag to his bedroom, the larger of the two, and said, "This should be yours now. You are my wife. We should share the bed if you are willing." Beatrice's heart hammered in her chest. She had known this moment would come, had thought about it during the long train journey. "I am willing," she said, though her voice shook slightly. Owen approached her slowly, as if she were a wild thing that might bolt. He cupped her face in his large hands, his thumbs brushing her cheeks. "I will be gentle," he promised. "Tell me if I do anything you do not like." When he kissed her, it was nothing like the chaste peck in the reverend's parlor. This was deeper, searching, and Beatrice found herself responding, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders. He tasted like coffee and winter air, and his body was warm and solid against hers. She had never been kissed like this, had never felt desire curl hot and urgent in her belly. When he lifted her and carried her to the bed, she went willingly, nervousness and anticipation warring within her. Owen was true to his word, gentle and patient, coaxing her body to respond to his touch. There was pain, brief and sharp, but then there was pleasure too, building slowly until she cried out and clutched at his back. Afterward, he held her close, her head on his chest, his hand stroking her hair. "Are you all right?" he murmured. "Yes," Beatrice whispered. "More than all right." She fell asleep that way, wrapped in her husband's arms, and for the first time since her father's death she felt safe. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Owen rose before dawn to tend the animals and check on the cattle, while Beatrice managed the house and the chickens. She cleaned and cooked, mended his worn shirts and her own threadbare dresses, and slowly began to make the house feel like a home. She rearranged the furniture to make better use of the space, washed the dusty curtains, and organized the larder so she could find things easily. Owen never complained about the changes, only smiled and said the house looked better than it ever had. The cold was relentless. Some mornings, the water in the pitcher froze solid, and the wind howled around the house like a living thing. But inside, with the fire blazing and Owen's solid presence beside her, Beatrice found herself happier than she had been in years. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's habits and preferences. Owen liked his coffee black and strong. Beatrice read before bed. Owen could fix almost anything with his hands. Beatrice had a talent for mental arithmetic that impressed him. And in the darkness of their bedroom, they learned each other's bodies, discovering what brought pleasure and what made them gasp and cling to each other. Beatrice had not expected to want her husband the way she did, with an intensity that sometimes shocked her. But Owen met her desire with his own, and their physical connection deepened the emotional bond growing between them. 2 weeks after their wedding, a terrible blizzard struck. The wind screamed like 1,000 demons, and the snow fell so thick that Beatrice could not see the barn from the house window. Owen had to string a rope from the house to the barn, so he would not get lost in the whiteout when he went to tend the animals. He came back each time coated in ice, his eyebrows white with frost, and Beatrice would strip off his frozen clothes and rub warmth back into his skin with her hands. "This is the worst I have seen in 5 years," Owen said on the second day of the blizzard. They were sitting together on the floor in front of the fire, wrapped in blankets, trying to stay warm. The house shuddered with each gust of wind, and Beatrice could hear the howl in the chimney. "The cattle will be huddled together somewhere, trying to survive. I cannot do anything for them until it passes. Just hope we do not lose too many." "How long can a cow survive in this?" Beatrice asked. "Depends. They are tougher than you might think, but if this lasts more than a few days, we will lose some." His jaw was tight with worry. "I cannot afford to lose too many." Beatrice leaned against his shoulder. "We will manage," she said, though she had no idea if that was true. "We will manage together." Owen's arm came around her, pulling her close. "I am glad you are here," he said into her hair. "I do not know what I would do if I was facing this alone." The blizzard finally broke on the 4th day, leaving behind a world buried under drifts that reached the windows in places. Owen dug his way to the barn, and then set out on horseback to check the herd. He was gone for hours, and Beatrice paced the house, worry gnawing at her. What if he got lost? What if the horse stumbled and threw him? What if he froze out there and she never knew what happened? When she finally heard the sound of hoofbeats, she ran to the door and flung it open. Owen looked exhausted, his face haggard, but he managed a smile when he saw her. "Lost 23 head," he said as he dismounted. "Could have been worse." Beatrice helped him unsaddle the horse and get the animal settled in the barn with extra feed. Then she practically dragged Owen back to the house and made him sit by the fire while she heated soup and pressed a mug of hot coffee into his hands. He drank it gratefully, the color slowly returning to his face. 23, he repeated. That is money lost. Money we need for supplies, for taxes, for next winter. We will make it up, Beatrice said firmly. We will economize, we will be careful, we will find a way. Owen looked at her and his expression softened. When did you start saying we? He asked quietly. Beatrice realized she had been saying it all along without thought. I suppose when you became my husband, she said. This is my life now too. Your problems are my problems. Owen set down his coffee and reached for her, pulling her into his lap. I do not deserve you, he said against her neck. You do, Beatrice replied, wrapping her arms around him. You absolutely do. January turned into February, and the worst of the winter began to ease slightly. There were still storms and bitter cold, but there were also days when the sun shone and the temperature rose above freezing. On one such day, Owen taught Beatrice to ride properly. She had ridden before in Boston, but only sedately in parks, not the kind of riding required on a ranch. He saddled a gentle mare named Rosie and led her into the yard. The important thing is to trust the horse, he said, helping Beatrice mount. Rosie knows what she is doing better than you do. Let her pick her way through the snow and do not try to force her. Beatrice settled into the saddle, feeling strange and exposed up so high. Owen mounted his own horse, a tall gelding named Duke, and they set off together across the white landscape. The cold air burned in Beatrice's lungs, but the sensation of movement of the powerful animal beneath her was exhilarating. They rode out to check the cattle, who were foraging in a snow-cleared area near a stand of cottonwoods. The animals looked thin but alive, their breath steaming in the cold. We will start feeding them hay soon, Owen said. We have enough to get them through until spring grazing. Barely. On the ride back, Beatrice felt something shift inside her. This was her land now, too. These cattle, this ranch, this life. She was not just a guest or a helper. She was Owen's wife, a partner in this enterprise. The responsibility was daunting, but it was also empowering. That night, she played the piano for Owen after supper, working her way through the pieces she still remembered. He sat in the rocking chair and listened, his eyes half closed, a slight smile on his lips. When she finished, he said, That is the best sound this house has ever heard. You are easy to please, Beatrice teased, maybe. Owen stood and crossed to the piano, looking down at her. Or maybe you just bring out the best in this place, in me. Beatrice reached up and took his hand. You brought out something in me too, she said. I did not know I could be this happy. As winter slowly began to release its grip, Beatrice found herself settling into her new life with increasing confidence. She took over all the cooking and found she enjoyed experimenting with the limited ingredients available. She made bread that was lighter than Owen's dense loaves, and she figured out how to make a decent stew from venison and root vegetables. She sewed curtains for the bedroom from fabric she found in a trunk, pale blue calico that brightened the room. She even tried her hand at knitting, though her stitches were uneven, and her first attempt at a scarf looked more like a lumpy snake. Owen, for his part, seemed to bloom under the influence of her presence. He smiled more, laughed at her jokes, and talked about the future with an optimism he admitted he had not felt in years. They made plans for the spring, for expanding the garden, for perhaps buying a few more cattle if they could afford it. They talked about painting the house, about fixing the broken porch step, about 1,000 small improvements that would make the ranch more prosperous and comfortable. In early March, Beatrice woke one morning feeling queasy. She barely made it outside before she was sick in the snow. Owen found her there, pale and shaking, and carried her back inside with a worried expression. "What is wrong?" he demanded, settling her in the rocking chair. "Should I ride for the doctor?" "No," Beatrice said weakly. "I think I am all right, just my stomach." But the nausea continued for days, always in the morning, and Beatrice began to suspect the truth. She had not had her monthly courses since before she left Boston, but she had attributed that to the stress of travel and upheaval. Now, as her breasts grew tender and her fatigue increased, she could no longer deny the obvious. She waited until she was certain before telling Owen. One evening after supper, as they sat together by the fire, she took his hand and placed it on her still, flat belly. "There is going to be a baby," she said quietly. Owen went very still. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice strange. "As sure as I can be without a doctor." For a long moment he said nothing, and Beatrice felt fear creep into her heart. What if he did not want children? What if this was too much, too soon? But then Owen let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and pulled her into his arms. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "Our baby." He pulled back to look at her face, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Are you happy about this?" "Yes," Beatrice said, and realized it was true. A few months ago she had been alone and frightened, with no future to speak of. Now she was married to a good man, living on a ranch she was learning to love, carrying a child. "Yes, I am very happy." Owen kissed her then, fierce and tender at once. "I will take care of you," he promised. "Both of you, I swear it." True to his word, Owen became almost comically protective. He tried to prevent Beatrice from doing any heavy work, which she tolerated for a few days before putting her foot down. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him firmly. "I will not lift anything too heavy, and I will rest when I am tired, but I am not going to sit in a chair for the next 6 months while you do everything." "I just want to keep you safe," Owen protested. "I know, and I love you for it. But I need to stay active. The doctor back in Boston told my aunt that women who stay active during pregnancy have easier births." This was not entirely true, but it was close enough, and it seemed to reassure Owen. "You love me?" he asked, seizing on the words she had spoken without thinking. Beatrice felt her cheeks heat. "Yes," she admitted. "I do. I think I have for a while now." Owen's face transformed, joy breaking across it like sunrise. "I love you too," he said. "I did not want to say it first, did not want to pressure you. But Beatrice, I have loved you since the day you stepped off that train and looked at me like I might be worth trusting." They held each other for a long time, the fire crackling beside them, the wind gentle outside the windows. Beatrice felt something settle inside her, a peace she had not known she was seeking. This was home. This was love. This was the life she had always wanted but never dared to hope for. Spring came slowly to North Dakota, the snow retreating inch by stubborn inch. By late April, patches of brown earth were visible, and by May the world was transforming into green. Beatrice worked in the garden, planting seeds Owen had ordered from a catalog: tomatoes, beans, squash, carrots, lettuce, herbs. She was showing now, her belly rounding under her dresses, and she had to let out the seams to accommodate her changing shape. The cattle were moved to summer pasture, and Owen hired 2 hands to help with the work. A young man named Thomas, who was saving money to buy his own land, and an older cowboy called Red who had been working ranches for 30 years. They stayed in the bunkhouse Owen had built the previous year, and they took their meals at the main house, which meant Beatrice was cooking for 4 instead of 2. She did not mind. She enjoyed the company, the conversation, the way the house felt alive with people. Thomas was only 19, earnest and hardworking, full of dreams about the future. Red was weathered and laconic, but he had a dry sense of humor that made Beatrice laugh. They both treated her with respect, tipping their hats when they saw her, complimenting her cooking and asking if she needed any heavy work done. In June, Owen took Beatrice to town for the first time since their wedding. She needed fabric for baby clothes and other supplies she could not make herself. The trip took half a day, and Beatrice was exhausted by the time they arrived, her back aching from the wagon's jolting. But it was wonderful to see other people, to walk through the general store and examine the goods, to speak with the storekeeper's wife who offered advice about childbirth and babies. They visited Reverend Matthews, who was delighted to hear about the coming baby and insisted on giving Beatrice a beautiful hand-knitted blanket his wife had made. "Every child should be welcomed with warmth," he said, pressing it into her hands. On the way home, Owen said, "I have been thinking. After the baby comes, maybe we should try to get to town more often. It is not good for you to be so isolated. You need friends, other women to talk to." "I have you," Beatrice said. "I know, but it is not the same. You left everything behind to come here. The least I can do is make sure you have some kind of community." Beatrice looked at her husband, at his profile strong against the sky, and felt a surge of love so intense it almost hurt. "You are a good man, Owen Kendrick." "I try," he said. "For you, I try." July brought heat and work. The garden flourished under Beatrice's care, and she spent hours weeding and watering and harvesting the first tender lettuce and radishes. The cattle grew fat on summer grass, and Owen's worry about money began to ease. They would have a good year, he thought, barring disaster. The loss from the winter storm would be balanced by the calves that had been born in spring. Beatrice's belly swelled larger, and she moved with increasing difficulty. The heat was oppressive, and she spent the worst part of the afternoons resting in the bedroom with the curtains drawn. Owen brought her cool water from the well and sat with her, reading aloud from the novels on his shelf. His voice was soothing, and Beatrice would lie with her eyes closed, one hand on her restless baby, and think about how strange and wonderful life was. In mid-August, Beatrice began to feel odd twinges in her back and belly. She said nothing to Owen at first, not wanting to worry him unnecessarily. But when the twinges became regular and more intense, she knew the baby was coming. It was 2 weeks earlier than she had expected, but the midwife in town had said first babies often came when they wanted to, not when they were supposed to. "Owen," she said calmly, interrupting his conversation with Red about fence repairs, "you need to ride to town and get Dr. Helmer. The baby is coming." Owen went white. "Now, are you sure? What should I do?" "Get the doctor," Beatrice repeated, "and ask the storekeeper's wife to come if she can. Her name is Martha. She said she would help when the time came." Owen ran for the barn, and Beatrice heard him shouting for Thomas to saddle Duke. Within minutes, he was thundering down the road toward Fargo, leaving a cloud of dust behind him. Beatrice stood in the yard, breathing through a contraction, and then went inside to prepare. Red appeared at the door, looking terrified. "Madam, is there anything I can do?" "Boil water," Beatrice said, remembering what Martha had told her. "Lots of it, and find me some clean sheets, top shelf in the bedroom cupboard." Red scurried to obey, and Thomas hovered anxiously nearby, asking every few minutes if she was all right. Beatrice was not all right, not exactly, but she was managing. The contractions were growing stronger, radiating from her back around to her belly, taking her breath away. But between them, she felt clear-headed and focused. Owen returned 3 hours later with Dr. Helmer, a competent man in his 50s, and Martha, a plump woman with kind eyes and capable hands. By that time, Beatrice was in the bedroom, gripping the headboard as another contraction tore through her. Martha shooed the men out immediately. "This is women's work now," she said firmly. "Owen, you go wait outside. Doctor, you can stay, but let me handle things unless there is a problem." The next few hours were a blur of pain and effort. Beatrice had never experienced anything like it, the relentless waves of contraction that made her body feel like it was being torn apart. Martha held her hand and coached her through breathing, and Dr. Helmer monitored the baby's progress with professional detachment. Finally, as the sun was setting and the bedroom glowed with golden light, Martha said, "One more push, dear. Give me one more good push." Beatrice bore down with every ounce of strength she had left, and suddenly there was a release, a sense of something giving way, and then a baby's cry filled the room. She collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted beyond measure, and heard Martha laugh with delight. "It is a boy," Martha announced, wrapping the baby in a clean cloth. "A healthy, angry boy." She placed the squalling infant on Beatrice's chest, and Beatrice looked down at her son through tears. He was red-faced and wrinkled, his eyes squeezed shut, his tiny fists waving. He was perfect. "Hello," Beatrice whispered. "Hello, little one." Martha cleaned Beatrice up and helped her into a fresh nightgown, then went to the door. "Owen," she called, "come meet your son." Owen burst into the room like he had been shot from a cannon. He stopped beside the bed, staring down at the bundle in Beatrice's arms with an expression of absolute wonder. "A son," he breathed. "Do you want to hold him?" Beatrice asked. Owen looked terrified, but he nodded. Beatrice showed him how to support the baby's head, and then the tiny weight was in Owen's arms. The baby had stopped crying and was making small snuffling sounds, and Owen looked at him like he was witnessing a miracle. "What will you name him?" Dr. Helmer asked. Beatrice and Owen had discussed names but never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at her husband holding their son, Beatrice said, "Oliver, for my father, if that is all right with you." "Oliver Kendrick," Owen said, testing the name. I like it very much." He looked at Beatrice, his eyes shining with tears. Thank you for him, for everything." That night, after the doctor and Martha had left, after Thomas and Red had poked their heads in to offer awkward congratulations, after Owen had checked on the cattle and the horses and made sure everything was secure, he lay beside Beatrice in the bed and watched her nurse their son. Oliver latched on with surprising enthusiasm, and Beatrice winced but smiled. "Does it hurt?" Owen asked. "A little, but it is supposed to. Martha said it will get easier." She looked at their baby, at his downy dark hair and his tiny perfect fingers. "He looks like you think so, MMM. He has your chin, and I think his eyes might be blue." "All babies have blue eyes at first," Owen said, but he looked pleased. They lay there in the lamplight, the three of them, and Beatrice thought that she had never been happier. This moment, this family, this was everything she had never known to want. The days after Oliver's birth were a chaotic adjustment. The baby needed to be fed every few hours, day and night, and Beatrice was constantly exhausted. Owen tried to help as much as he could, changing soiled diapers and walking the floor with Oliver when he fussed. Martha came to visit twice a week, bringing food and advice, and Beatrice was grateful for her kindness. As summer faded into autumn, Oliver grew and changed, becoming more alert and responsive. He would track movement with his eyes and startle at loud sounds. He began to smile, real smiles that were not just gas, and the first time he smiled at Owen, Beatrice thought her husband might burst with pride. The cattle were moved back to winter pasture, and Owen began preparing for the cold months ahead. He worked long hours, and Beatrice could see the weariness in the set of his shoulders. But when he came home and held his son, all the fatigue seemed to fall away. He was a devoted father, patient and gentle, and Beatrice fell in love with him all over again watching him with Oliver. In October, Owen sold half his cattle at market, getting a good price that would see them through the winter with money to spare. He came home with supplies and gifts, fabric for Beatrice to make new dresses, toys for Oliver even though he was too young for them, and a beautiful shawl in soft blue wool. "You did not need to spend money on me," Beatrice protested, but she wrapped the shawl around her shoulders and reveled in its warmth. "I wanted to," Owen said. "You have given me so much. Let me give you something in return." That winter was hard, but nothing like the previous one. They were prepared now, with ample supplies and wood stacked high beside the house. Oliver was a good baby, generally happy and not too fussy, and Beatrice managed to get enough sleep to function. Owen continued to be protective, insisting she not overwork herself, and Beatrice let him coddle her a little because it clearly made him feel better. On Christmas morning, they exchanged simple gifts. Beatrice had knitted Owen a scarf, this one much better than her first attempt, in deep brown wool. Owen had carved Oliver a wooden horse, smooth and perfect, that would be waiting for him when he was old enough to play with it. And for Beatrice, he had ordered something special from a catalog, a music book with simplified arrangements of classical pieces. "I know the piano is still out of tune," he said as she opened it, "but I thought you might like to have new music to learn anyway." Beatrice kissed him, long and sweet. "It is perfect. You are perfect." Oliver celebrated his first Christmas by spitting up on Reverend Matthews during their visit to town the next week, which the old minister took with good humor. They had dinner with him and his wife, and Beatrice felt the warmth of community, of belonging. She was no longer a stranger here. She was Owen's wife, Oliver's mother, a member of this small town on the edge of the frontier. Winter passed into spring again and the cycle repeated. The garden was planted, the cattle moved to summer pasture, the work continued. But now there was Oliver, learning to sit up, then to crawl, then to pull himself up on furniture with determination in his blue eyes. He was walking by the time he turned one, wobbling across the floor into Owen's waiting arms, and Beatrice captured the moment in her memory like a photograph. In the spring of 1887, Beatrice realized she was pregnant again. This time the news was expected, even hoped for, and Owen's reaction was pure joy. "Oliver needs a brother or sister," he said, kissing her belly. "He will be a wonderful big brother." The second pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Beatrice knew what to expect. She was tired and sick in the early months, but by summer she felt energetic and strong. Oliver toddled around the house and yard, getting into everything, and Beatrice spent half her time chasing after him. Owen built a fence around the garden to keep the curious toddler from pulling up all the plants. This baby came in early November, right on time. Beatrice's labor was shorter and less intense than with Oliver, and when Martha placed a squalling baby girl in her arms, Beatrice felt complete. "A daughter," she said, looking down at the red-faced infant. The baby had a shock of dark hair and a loud cry that suggested she would be a force to be reckoned with. Owen was smitten instantly. "She is beautiful," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "just like her mother." They named her Emma after Owen's mother, and Oliver was fascinated by his new sister. He would stand beside the cradle and stare at her, occasionally reaching out to touch her hand with surprising gentleness. "Baby," he would say solemnly, one of his few words. With 2 children, life became even more chaotic. Beatrice sometimes felt like she was drowning in the endless cycle of feeding and changing and soothing. But there were moments of piercing sweetness too. Oliver bringing her a wilted flower from the garden, Emma's first smile, Owen reading bedtime stories to the children in his deep, patient voice. The ranch continued to prosper. Owen expanded his herd and hired more help, and he talked about building a bigger barn. He had become a respected member of the community, known for his fair dealing and hard work. And Beatrice had made friends among the ranch wives and town women, forming bonds that eased the isolation of frontier life. On a crisp autumn day in 1888, when Oliver was 3 and Emma was almost 1, Beatrice stood on the porch and watched Owen play with the children in the yard. He was chasing Oliver around while carrying Emma on his hip, making exaggerated monster noises that had Oliver shrieking with laughter. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and the air smelled of wood smoke and coming winter. Martha had come to visit and stood beside Beatrice, watching the scene with a smile. "You have built a good life here," she said. "I have," Beatrice agreed. "I never imagined this when I stepped off that train nearly 4 years ago." "What did you imagine?" "Survival, mostly. A roof over my head and food on the table. I did not dare hope for happiness." And now, Beatrice watched Owen swing Oliver up onto his shoulders while Emma giggled in the crook of his arm. "Now I have everything I never knew I needed." The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. There was the year an early freeze killed half the garden. There was the year Oliver fell from the barn loft and broke his arm, giving Beatrice her first gray hairs from worry. There was the year Emma learned to talk and never stopped, her constant chatter filling the house with life and noise. In 1890, Beatrice became pregnant for a 3rd time. She was 30 now, and this pregnancy was harder than the previous 2. She was exhausted all the time and her back ached constantly. But Owen was attentive and the children tried to be helpful in their own chaotic way, and Beatrice made it through. This baby came in August, during the worst of the summer heat. It was another boy, smaller than Oliver had been but healthy and strong. They named him Henry, and he had Owen's blue eyes and Beatrice's lighter hair, a combination that was striking even in infancy. With 3 children, the house that had once felt too large now seemed barely big enough. Oliver was 6 now and helping with small chores around the ranch. Emma was 4 and insisted on helping Beatrice with the cooking, which usually meant creating more work. And Henry was a demanding baby who did not sleep well and cried often. Beatrice sometimes felt like she was being pulled in too many directions at once, but Owen was her anchor, steady and strong. On particularly difficult days, he would take over the evening routine with the children, sending Beatrice to bed early. He would bring her coffee in the morning and tell her she was beautiful even when she felt like a wrung-out dish rag. He loved her with a constancy that never wavered, and she loved him with the same fierce devotion. One evening in the autumn of 1891, after the children were finally asleep and the house was quiet, Owen and Beatrice sat together on the porch as they had done countless times before. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the air was cool and sweet. "You ever regret it?" Owen asked suddenly. "Answering my advertisement, coming all this way," Beatrice looked at him, surprised. "Never. Why would you ask that? I see how hard you work, how tired you are. I know this life is not easy." "Nothing worth having is easy," Beatrice said. She took his hand and laced their fingers together. "You gave me a home when I had none, a family when I was alone, Love when I thought I would never find it. Why would I regret that? Owen brought her hand to his lips and kissed it. Sometimes I still cannot believe you are real, that this is real. Believe it, Beatrice said. We built this together. This life, this family, this love. It is as real as anything can be. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds. The distant lowing of cattle, the rustle of wind in the grass, the hoot of an owl. Beatrice thought about the girl she had been, stepping off that train into the snow, terrified and hopeful in equal measure. She had been so young then, so uncertain. Now she was a woman with 3 children, a working ranch, and a husband who loved her more than she had thought possible to be loved. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what? For saying welcome home, for meaning it, for making it true." Owen's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her close. "You were home from that first moment," he said. "I just did not know it yet, but you were always meant to be here, with me." The years continued their steady march. The children grew, the ranch prospered, and the love between Beatrice and Owen deepened with each passing season. There were hard times too, of course. There was the year of drought when they nearly lost everything. There was the year Emma got scarlet fever and they thought they might lose her, sitting vigil by her bedside for 3 terrible days until the fever broke. There was the year Owen's best horse died and he grieved like he had lost a friend. But there were far more good times than bad. There were birthday celebrations and Christmas mornings filled with laughter. There were summer picnics by the creek and winter evenings around the fire. There were the small daily moments that made up a life. Owen kissing Beatrice goodbye in the morning, Oliver proudly showing his father how he could rope a fence post, Emma learning to play simple songs on the old piano, Henry taking his first steps. In 1895, Oliver turned 10 and began working alongside his father in earnest. He was a natural rancher, with an instinct for cattle and horses that made Owen proud. Emma was 8 now, all flying pigtails and fierce opinions, determined to prove she could do anything her older brother could do. And Henry was 5, the baby of the family, sweet-natured and curious about everything. Beatrice was 35 now, with silver threads in her honey-colored hair and fine lines around her eyes. But when Owen looked at her, he still saw the young woman who had stepped off that train 10 years ago, brave and uncertain and beautiful. And when Beatrice looked at Owen, she saw the man who had welcomed her home, who had given her everything, who loved her with a depth and constancy that still took her breath away. One evening that summer, they were sitting on the porch again after the children had gone to bed. It had become their ritual, this quiet time together, and neither of them would have given it up for anything. Beatrice was mending one of Oliver's shirts, and Owen was whittling a toy soldier for Henry. "You remember the blizzard?" Beatrice asked suddenly. "That terrible one our first winter?" "Of course. Lost 23 head. You told me we would manage. We did manage. We did more than manage." Owen set down his knife and looked at her. "We built something real, B, something lasting. Look at what we have. 3 healthy children, a successful ranch, each other. When I think about what my life would have been without you." He trailed off, shaking his head. "Lonely," Beatrice supplied. "That is what you said back then, that your life felt too empty." "It was empty. I was just existing like you said you were before you came here. Going through the motions. And then you arrived and everything changed. You filled my life with light and purpose and love. You gave me a reason to build something instead of just surviving." Beatrice set down her mending and moved to sit on Owen's lap, something she had not done in years. He wrapped his arms around her automatically, and she leaned her head against his shoulder. "You saved me too," she said softly. "I was so scared when I got on that train. I had no idea what I was going to find. I half expected you to be cruel or crude or disappointed in me." But you were none of those things. You were kind and patient and good. You made me feel safe." "I will always keep you safe," Owen promised. "You and the children, that is my job, my purpose." "Our purpose is each other," Beatrice corrected. "We keep each other safe, we make each other better. That is what love is." Owen kissed her then, long and deep, and for a moment they were not tired parents in their 30s but young newlyweds discovering each other. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "Bed," Owen suggested, his voice rough with desire. "Bed," Beatrice agreed. They still came together like that sometimes, with passion and urgency, though less frequently than in the early days. But the physical connection was still important, still a way of expressing what words could not fully capture. That night, they made love with the tenderness of long familiarity and the excitement of enduring desire, and afterward they lay tangled together, reluctant to let go. As the 20th century approached, the frontier was changing. More settlers were arriving, towns were growing, and the wild freedom of the early days was giving way to civilization. But for Beatrice and Owen, the essential things remained the same: family, work, love. They had built their life on those foundations, and those foundations were solid. In 1899, Oliver turned 14 and announced he wanted to stay on the ranch, to eventually take it over when Owen was ready to step back. Owen could not have been prouder. Emma was 12, beginning to notice boys despite her parents' dismay, and talking about becoming a teacher. Henry was 9, still sweet and gentle, with a gift for gentling horses that amazed everyone. Beatrice was 40 now, comfortable in her own skin in a way she had never been when she was young. She had gray in her hair and lines on her face, and her body bore the marks of 3 pregnancies and years of hard work. But she was happy. Genuinely, deeply happy in a way she had never imagined possible. One cold December morning, Beatrice woke before dawn and lay quietly beside her sleeping husband. Through the window, she could see snow falling, thick and soft, just like it had been that day 14 years ago when she arrived. The circle felt complete somehow. Owen stirred and opened his eyes, immediately focusing on her face. "What is wrong?" he asked, instantly alert. "Nothing. I was just thinking about the day we met. Do you remember what you said to me?" Owen smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his weathered face. "Welcome home." "You meant it as courtesy, I think, but it became truth. You made it truth. This is my home. You are my home." Owen pulled her close and they lay together, listening to the house wake up around them, the children stirring in their rooms, the wind outside the windows, the creak of old wood settling. This was their life, ordinary and extraordinary, hard and beautiful, exactly what they had both needed without knowing they needed it. "I love you," Owen said. "More today than yesterday, more tomorrow than today." "That is a lot of love," Beatrice teased. "You deserve it all." They rose together and started their day as they had started every day for 14 years, with coffee and conversation and the comfortable routine of a long marriage. Oliver came in from the barn, stamping snow from his boots, already looking like the man he would become. Emma set the table, chattering about the Christmas pageant at church. Henry fed the chickens and came back with eggs carefully cradled in his small hands. This was the life Beatrice had chosen when she answered that advertisement so long ago. This was the home Owen had offered when he met her at that train station in the snow. They had built it together, day by day, year by year, with work and love and determination. And as Beatrice looked around her kitchen at her husband and her children, at the life they had created, she knew with absolute certainty that she would choose it all again. Every hardship, every joy, every moment had led to this. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The new century arrived with hope and promise. The children continued to grow and flourish. The ranch remained prosperous, and Beatrice and Owen grew old together, their love only deepening with time. They would have decades more together, watching grandchildren arrive and the world change around them. But the essential truth remained constant. That cold December day in 1885, when a frightened young woman stepped off a train and a lonely cowboy said, "Welcome home," they had found exactly what they both needed. They had found each other, and that made all the difference.